You're listening to the Iterators of the Imperium.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of Iterators of the Imperium. I'm Ryan, I'm here with my co-host Mez.
Yo.
Mez, do you remember in the first episode, you said that the space elves sounded cool to you?
Yeah, they were the ones that like spoke to me the most. Let me say it like that.
Yeah. So, I had a list of episodes that we could have started off with here. It really kicked things off. And then I thought, you know what, the best way to do this, let's go into one that really would have piqued your interest. So I was like, we're doing space elves. It's got to be space elves. But there's a particular part of the space elves we're going to do. It's really important for setting the scene of everything we're about to do here. Everything we're going to talk about in this podcast. So, this is a pretty big moment in the lore of the overall Warhammer 40k universe. But luckily, it's not ridiculously involved, and you'll get to learn a bit about space elves.
Okay.
So, for the record, as you may have guessed by the 40k thing in the name, Warhammer 40k is set in the 40th millennia, or 41st millennia, because it's the year, or after the year 40,000. Mm-hmm. But what we're talking about today actually starts off in about the year, or the 24th or 25th millennia. Sorry, so 24,000, 25,000. So we're still a fair bit ahead in the future.
Yeah, from now,
yes, from where we are recording this.
Yes.
So for the record, there are no books on this topic. Okay. There are a lot of we talked this last time. There are over 350 books about Warhammer 40k. There are no books on this topic. There are references to it among other books, and have been in codexes about different factions of the past, stuff like that. But there is no novels or anything set within this time period, for pretty severe reasons, as might become apparent as we go. But that shows that there's not a lot you can do research-wise about this, unfortunately.
But wait, how do you know it then, Ryan? And why should the listeners listen to this episode then?
Oh no, I've been scouring the internet to find as much information about this as possible, to condense it into as reasonable a way to explain this as possible, without going too detailed into things that are better explained in more specific topics.
You know, that's what I like to hear, Ryan. You have piqued my interest. Let's get to it then.
Okay, so for the record, the reason that there are no books about this is that within the lore, right, the reason there are no books about this is that the Eldar will not discuss this event in their history with creatures of a lesser race.
Wow.
Yeah, Jesus. So they are not telling humanity anything about this.
Oh.
Yeah, just so you know. There's always an in-lore reason and an out-of-lore reason for why things are the way they are. So the in-lore reason is that they will not tell anyone of a lesser race about it, and they don't respect humanity or anything like that. The out-of-lore reason is it would be really boring because there wasn't any other races around at the time that were important.
Okay, yeah.
So, to give an idea, we're starting off 24th, 25th millennia here, so we're quite a bit back from where the current story of Warhammer 40k is going on, which is 40,000 and so on. At this point, the Eldar run the galaxy, right? They are the most prevalent race. They are technologically beyond anything we can imagine, because they are so psychically linked to the warp. Magically speaking, they have power beyond anything we could imagine and can do things we can't even begin to comprehend with it. Their empire also spans almost the entire galaxy as well. At this point in time, the warp is full of crazy storms. It is a very chaotic place, and this has just been building up over a long period of time. Over thousands of years this has built up. So if you were to try and use the warp to do a kind of fast travel across the galaxy now, it would be very dangerous because of these storms. The chances of getting out alive would be nigh on nothing, even for the Eldar. But remember, the Eldar have the webways, which are those tunnels through it that are like the aquarium tunnels. They can still use that. That's perfectly isolated from all the storms. So even though say, humanity at the time couldn't use the warp to travel. The Eldar still could because they could use the webways that were pre-built. So they had a lot
Okay.
of advantages to maintain their position of being the top dogs in the galaxy. So the other thing, at this point in time, humanity was currently in an age called the Age of Strife, which was caused by the warp storms. We're not really getting into humanity, but like, just so you know, at this point in time, humanity was still around. They were still doing stuff. It just was a pretty rough time for them because of the warp storms that were going on at this period.
Yeah, I feel like you came across this briefly in the last episode as well.
I think I
Like,
mentioned it a
briefly.
little bit that humanity had a rough time for a while before they kind of got to what's going on now.
Yeah, and I do believe you mentioned that you will tell me about this in later, and it will all make sense.
Oh,
So yes.
absolutely. That's part of one of the really big storylines for humanity. So explaining humanity's side of that really fits better in a humanity-based episode, you know what I mean? There's a storyline we can follow with it, which is a much better way of doing it. But
Yeah.
just giving you a point of reference between Eldar and humanity for the time scale we're dealing with here. Oh, as an example of their like crazy warp abilities, the Eldar are able, or were able to, I think they may still be able to actually. Anyway, they were able to condense the energy of the warp into a physical, like composite material called Wraithbone. They could make it into a physical object that they could craft stuff with.
What?
Yeah.
What?
So this stuff was like impervious to the warp and incredibly strong and powerful. The stuff you could do with this is insane. You know what a good way to think of it is like? You know, in Marvel, vibranium, it's
Yeah,
unbelievably
really
rare and
strong.
unbelievably powerful, and nigh on
Yeah.
or actually indestructible. It's
Mhm.
like that, right? It is next level materials made with crazy alien magic. Like, humanity can't even fathom how they did it back then, where we are now. We have no comprehension of this stuff. It exists,
Yeah.
aliens have it, we don't quite get it.
So basically, like Marvel, right? You need to have like 3 of the Infinity Stones to even start bothering with this stuff, you know?
That's exactly it, right? And the Eldar's technology had advanced so much by the time period we're starting at here that they didn't need to do anything. Like, everything was automated for them. They didn't have to worry about food or anything like that. It was all just handled by their technology.
Yeah.
So their culture really started to stagnate quite heavily. And I don't know if you know much about any like living humans or anything like that. When you don't need to work, you get bored and then basically start causing your own problems.
Yeah, that sounds like me in summer holidays when I was a kid.
Exactly, there you go.
2 weeks in, I didn't know what to do with this.
That's exactly it. That's essentially what their entire culture hit real quickly.
Yeah.
So they got bored, or they got stagnant, then they got bored, and then so Eldar live forever, and also there's a side thing, right? One of the reasons they're so strong in the like with magic, with all the warp stuff, is their souls seem to be linked to it in a much stronger way than like humanities or other races are. So anything they do, so you know how I was explaining that emotions and stuff like that affect the warp, or even someone dying, their soul returns to the warp, that has an effect on it.
Yeah.
Theirs is a much stronger effect because they're so linked to it, but it has like a benefit and a negative basically, because the benefit is that it makes them able to do much more with warp than any human could even conceive of on average. So your average human psyker is nothing compared to the worst Eldar psyker.
Okay.
But because they lived for so long and their society kind of went the way it did, they started essentially looking to experience any and all forms of sensation just to give their life some kind of meaning. But the longer you do that, the more or the stronger the sensation you need. So, you know a good example of it. You know, porn addicts.
Okay, or sugar addicts.
Either or, yeah, I guess. The problem is one of them you end up with diabetes. But so like these people that have like porn addiction will start off on like pretty vanilla stuff, and then a couple years later they're on like crazy like crayon drawn furry stuff.
Yeah, let's not get too much into
No,
that stuff.
we're not. But that's the way their culture went. They started off
Yeah.
trying to like get the best food ever, and then went to have the best sex ever, and then went to pain and pleasure aren't that far apart, and then it just got worse and worse from there. But because
Wait,
they
so
all lived for so long, it was like an art form.
so it basically is like from the base what human the base needs. So you mean like very PG in the beginning, with like food and stuff like that, and then later because of like the urges and stuff like that, it just gets disgusting at some point.
Yes, that's
Is that what you
exactly it.
mean?
It just gets worse and worse and worse because like the desires are still as strong as they were to begin with. The desire never gets sated because you're gonna bear do, you know what I mean? If you really wanted to get hurt at the start of it, that doesn't go away because you got nothing better to do with your time.
Yeah.
So the thing is, though, you build tolerances. Your appetite for these things changes the more you experience, and then you want more and more depraved things to fill the same desire.
Hmm.
So it started off with them like being like, "Oh, okay, let's like organize an orgy in a back room of someone's house or something like that," and then the next thing they had like pleasure cults. So like actual cults were formed for the sake of trying to do the weirdest, most pleasurable stuff their everlasting minds could conceive of.
Oh my god.
Yeah. And that rapidly like turned into like murder sex basically. Like
Sounds fun.
yeah,
Oh.
like
No.
pleasure and
No.
pain are only a thin veil away from each other, allegedly. These guys took that to an extreme and just started doing both at the same time, but like to an extreme. So like, don't just choke your partner to death. Like they really took it to an extreme.
I mean, that sounds pretty normal to me.
Yeah.
That-
Like on any given day, I may agree or disagree. It really just depends
No,
what
no,
kind of
no,
day
no,
I'm
no.
having.
Just disregard what I'm saying. Okay,
Don't worry, it's going to be
continue.
edited.
Okay, thank you.
This became a pretty prevalent thing within their society, right? It was like back alley stuff to begin with. You know, you hide it. It was cults. They were underground things for a long time, but they were growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And there was a point where, like, a fair amount of the Eldar culture were like, "This isn't gonna end well. I'm not really down with this. I'm gonna go." So like a fair section of their people that were on like their home worlds and like their main planets and stuff like that didn't
Yeah.
really jive with that vibe and were like, "I'm gonna go," and they just dipped out and they went to like the far off colonies at the edges of the galaxies and stuff, the rim worlds that weren't as ridiculously developed and stuff. So their technology might not have been like advanced to or built up to the point of not needing to anything. Maybe give their life a bit of purpose again and take away from those kind of ideas, that kind of stuff. They just wanted to get away from that mentality. They weren't really feeling it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So they were called the Exodites. They dipped out to as far away from it as they could possibly get while still being an Eldar culture. So remember I mentioned the webways, these tunnels in the warp.
Yes.
They weren't all just tunnels. Some had built like realms within the webways. So there was like cities and stuff within the webway.
Okay. And they were fairly safe if I remember correctly.
Oh
right?
yeah, because the Eldar are the only ones that have access to it, and they're perfectly isolated from the warp that they exist
Yeah.
within. So like demons and stuff aren't getting them. The evil gods can't get to them. They're just kind of hidden away from the rest of the galaxy. So it's a pretty
Yeah.
safe place to be. And there's a city called Kamara there, which is like the Eldar capital within the warp. Right, this is like their big place. But like, there's a lot of people live there, but it's still not like a common thing, you know. Not like it's not a really typical thing for Eldar to just be there. Although there is a pretty safe population in there. This city was where you went when the stuff you wanted to do was beyond the realms of even the sex cults. Like when you went to one of the pleasure cult meetings and started saying you wanted to do some stuff, and everyone looked at you like you were the weirdo, even though they're in the pleasure murder cult. that's when you're like, you know what, I'm going to dip out to Kamara within the webways where no one cares and everyone does everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the populace for Kamara bolstered a bit because of that, but also that place was just, it was like Sodom, right? You know, like Sodom and Gomorrah, the biblical thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a terminology some people that gets referenced once in a while, but it was just a city that became so unbelievably deprived because of this. So that was going on at the same time as like the Exodites were abandoning homeworld and try to, get back to some sense of normality. Time passes, and this becomes even more prevalent within their culture to the point that like their government collapses and everything because nothing is happening other than sex cults now, basically. Like, it's to the point that people are like playing like cat and mouse games in the streets of like hunter prey, and actually being like trying not to be murdered by some dude you've just asked to hunt you down and try to murder you in the street.
What the? This is weird, right?
Yeah, I'm telling you, their whole culture got so far gone just because of their technology and the length of their lives. Because they were like they were nigh on immortal, I believe. And they like as they got older, like their minds didn't deteriorate or anything. So it just enough time, things just get worse and worse, So their culture got to a point of being ridiculously bad. So it was like as bad as it could possibly get, basically. This was like all there was. And so there is now, at this point in the Eldar culture, an insane number of people being murdered within the realms of this stuff, which has taken over the bulk of their society.
Mm-hmm.
And when they die, they go to the warp. And when they died, they were in intense feelings of pleasure and pain and whatever else they were into. So that goes to the warp with them. And all of that is much stronger than a human, for example. So all of that going into the warp in the billions started to coalesce into a living entity within the warp.
Yeah.
And the storms were getting worse, and the whole thing was going on. So a section of the culture of the Eldar saw this happening and were like, right, something bad's gonna go down. We're getting out of here before it happens. Like, they could see something was going on. They didn't know exactly what, but they were not sticking around to find out. And the Eldar had these things called craft worlds. It was literally a world, like a planet-sized spacecraft that was built, I think primarily, or at least structurally, like the skeleton of it, was built out of wraithbone, the warp material.
The strongest material, yes.
Yes, right? So a huge amount of their culture got on these big wraithbone spaceships. And again, they stole everything that wasn't nailed down. Plants, animals, cultural stuff, everything. And they bailed. They were out of there. They did not want to hang around to see what was going on. They were like, this is the calm before the storm. And this isn't even very calm. Something's about to happen. I am not going to be here when it does. And they dipped as well. So they are now a faction referred to as the Craft World Eldar.
Mm-hmm.
The Eldar are split up into a bunch of factions. I'm telling you the origins of them all as we go through this. So you had the Exodites to begin with, now you've got the Craft World Eldar. Yeah, so this creature in the warp started to form while the souls that were going in at ridiculous amounts. And then the creature took its first breath. It came to life, rather than just being this like grouping of all the souls gradually building together and everything like that. It actually came to sentience and took its first breath. And when it did, it inhaled a massive majority of the Eldar race's souls.
Okay,
It took one breath and ripped the souls out of a huge amount of the Eldar race, and they all just dropped dead where they were. So, like, everyone on the homeworld, gone. Every psyker in their race, or a huge majority of the psykers in the races, gone. Even some on, like, the Exodite planets, the ones that are, like, way on the far rims of the galaxy, even some of them got taken. The Blackstone Fortress ones were relatively safe because the Wraithbone protects from the warp in a way. But even some of them, like the ones that were like particularly strong with a warp and stuff like that, the ones that are particularly sensitive, even some of them got pulled clean out of the warpstone fortresses. So just all of a sudden, the Eldar race goes from being the most powerful race in the galaxy, outnumbering everyone by the trillions, to like 3% of the race surviving, kind of thing. Like, or it's not that much. I think it's closer to like 20%, but like they are suddenly off the map, and this creature swells. This thing goes from being like first breath to being fat as all hell on the souls of the Eldar. It has just consumed their culture in one breath. The Eldar that were in Kamara, the city within the warp, they were safe though, because it's sealed within the webways. They didn't really get touched. And there is another group called the Harlequins, which are a faction of the Eldar as well. They were also saved, but we will get to that in a moment. So after all this, this is Slaanesh, by the way. This is one of the Chaos gods being born.
Yeah.
That was the only one I didn't explain the birth of, because it happened during stuff. This is how he was born, the god of debauchery and excess and everything like that. The Eldar made that dude. Well, actually, Slaanesh is not a dude. Seems to kind of be either vaguely genderless or go back and forth in a way, because a lot of the time it's referred to just in a generic male way, but the Eldar actually title it as She Who Thirsts or the Great Enemy. So seems to be relatively androgynous in gender. Although Chaos God, I don't think they're particularly bothered about if puny mortals misplace their pronouns. But we'll try to be as precise as possible. So She Who Thirsts, for the sake of the Eldar. The first thing they did after becoming a fully sentient creature and stuff, and eating as much of the Eldar as they could possibly get their hands on, they went after the Eldar gods. So the Eldar had been so powerful with the warp and everything like that for so long that one day they had just decided to start crafting their own gods. And they did. They made 7 of them for different things. So Slaanesh decides, those are my only real threat, and I also really like Eldar. Like, he was only looking at the Eldar at this point. I didn't give a fuck about anyone else. So the only issue of him devouring the entire Eldar race that could never possibly stand in his way was their 7 gods. So he decides he's eating them too. Or they decide they're eating them too. Slaanesh gets 5 of the 7 gods devoured, no problem. The last 2... What were you going to say?
Sorry, I'm just going to ask about the last 2.
Well, the last 2 are a thing, right? So, Cain is their god of war. Cain is basically undefeatable in combat because he's the god of war. But Slaanesh, having just been born and devoured a majority of the race's souls, is an absolute tank. So, Cain couldn't defeat Slaanesh, but Slaanesh couldn't defeat Cain either. They were in like a stalemate. And Khorne, the Chaos God of War, allegedly, right? This is weird, right? I found a lot of reference to this being alleged, that there was no real evidence or proof of this. That's a weird point, and I'll circle back to it in a moment, right? But allegedly, the story is that during this fight between Cain and Slaanesh, and it was kind of a stalemate, Khorne got involved. And the idea is that people think that Khorne was trying to devour Cain for himself, because Cain is the god of war, Khorne is the god of martial prowess and everything like that. So a god of war is right up his alley. That sounds like exactly the guy he wants to eat. And it looks like he was just trying to take the opportunity, which gave Slaanesh the upper hand, and it led to the defeat of Cain. But not the destruction, or not the devouring of Cain. Cain's soul was shattered, or Cain's form was shattered, and his soul was like turned into shards, basically, and is currently spread out among the Eldar that still are around. There's another thing that I also found out, and this is an absolute fact: Slaanesh and Khorne hate each other because Khorne got involved when he was trying to eat the God of War. So it's odd that people are clearly unsure of whether or not that event happened when you discuss the fight between Kane and Slaanesh. But 10 minutes later, are 100% sure that the reason that Slaanesh and Khorne hate each other is because Khorne did exactly what people claim he didn't act or might not have done. Very strange situation. There should be a book about this, just so that this argument is cleared up. Regardless, Khorne's followers and Slaanesh's followers still hate each other because of this. So it looks like that actually did happen. But moving on. There is a thing called the Infinity Circuit within Eldar culture, which I think it's the craft world that have it. And it's basically just this big wraithbone structure on some of their ships and stuff like that, and some of their planets, that they can store souls within to stop Slaanesh getting them. And it's called the Infinity Circuit. They just keep souls there because they can't let Slaanesh have them, I guess. And the shards of Kane's soul that are spread out amongst the culture are within the Infinity Circuit.
Okay.
Yeah, they have these big statues called Avatars of Kane, and if things get really rough for them and they're about to like lose a craft world or lose a planet or whatever, they can take the soul of Kane out of the Infinity Circuit and put it into one of these statues, and it like takes on the form of the god and is able to fight for them as an avatar of Kane.
That's sick.
It is unbelievably cool. So they can just like summon a portion of the God of War's power to protect them in times of need.
Fun fact, because now this is beside the point, but I'm Danish. We have something, a guy called Holger Danske, which is basically Holger the Dane. That sits like in the capital here in Denmark, like on the ground, like a giant ass statue. And there's like a legend saying if we ever going to need him for war, stuff like that, you know, kind of like this situation we are describing right now, then he will come to life and fight.
I love that.
Yeah, you see, the Danes do it better, man.
To be fair, that actually might be part of where this comes from, because a lot of what is in 40k is drawn from like real world situations and stuff like that.
Oh,
real world lore and stuff like that. Yeah. The whole thing's meant to be like a parody in a way of like humanity as a whole. So like the Eldar storyline that we're going through now is like a parody of like humanity's depravity and stuff like that, and how we like fall into these negative cycles that just get worse and worse as time goes on and stuff.
Yeah.
So they actually do take a lot of stuff from our actual like mythological lore and stuff like that feeds us, influences a lot of it. So that actually might be related.
I mean, it definitely sounds like awesome.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
That's something that, you know, gets my interest. You know, like you can use real life situations like we have with this situation, for example. You know, I'm not talking like the one in Harry Potter. You know, where the statues come to life to protect the school. I'm talking like real Nordic shit. You know.
Yeah.
Sort of.
You know, I love my Nordic lore. I have a whole leg sleeve tattooed about it.
Oh, I know. I've seen.
So, all right, the other god that survived, right, is the god of the Harlequins, which I mentioned briefly before, but I said I'll get into later. This is it. We're getting into it. So the last god to survive, I'm not sure how you pronounce the name. It's either Kegarak or Segarak. I would bet Segarak, but I don't know 100% sure. But he is the laughing god, or the trickster god. And essentially, there is some mention of him hiding behind Kane during the battle with Slaanesh, and then just sneaking away into the webways.
Okay.
But essentially, there is a realm within the webways called the Labyrinthian realm, and it's just a big labyrinth that's constantly warping and stuff. And that is where Segarak resides. And the Harlequins are like his followers. They're the Eldar that followed him were titled like this. And the Harlequins actually do look like old school jesters in a way, because their armor has this like phase shift cloak over it. So when you look at them, it like warps like the sight of them a little bit. Light warps around them slightly, right? And they have their uniforms, their armor and stuff painted with like old school Harlequin, like, you know, the diamond patterns of the different colors. Their uniforms and armor are painted with those, so that when they're in combat, because they're extremely agile, they're like typical like wood elf stuff from other lore. They're insanely fast. They move unbelievably quickly, and with the light warping thing and these weird colored patterns on their uniform, it's just really weird to look at them and really hard to figure out what is going on when you're fighting them because it messes with your vision so much.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of the reason that, like, or part of the tie-in with the old Harlequin thing. They actually do look like old school Harlequins, but there is an in-lore reason, and it's that it messes with the combatant's vision as you're trying to fight them.
Yeah.
Actually, I've looked into these guys a little bit, like deeper at one point before, and the coolest thing I remember about them is that there is a thing they have that's a mask you can wear that when someone looks at it, they see their worst fear. So you can be fighting this guy, and all you can see on his face is like your abusive father or something like that. Some big chaos demon that like tried to murder you 10 minutes ago that you're still reeling from. It's just all you see fighting this guy. So that's a pretty messed up bit of tech. But
yeah.
So these are Segarak's guys. They're his worshippers and his followers, and they do his bidding a bit in a way. And they all reside. They reside predominantly among the Eldar that are still around, but they also reside within the labyrinthian realm of the Webway with Segarak, which basically only they know how to navigate. So it's like a perfect defense system. No one is going to come and eat Segarak while they're around, or while they have to try and get through the maze of death. Like, you're just not going to manage that at any point in time.
No.
But when Slaanesh did his whole going around eating all the souls, Segarak saved the souls of the Harlequins that were among the culture at the time, like outside of the warp. So there is a thing where Segarak likes to prank Slaanesh, and basically what he means by that is sometimes when Eldar die and Slaanesh is going to eat their soul when they come into the warp, Segarak will just pop out of the webway, grab the soul, and sneak back in before he gets them, just to mess with him. But it keeps all the Harlequins safe and stuff like that. So they're like one of the cultures that doesn't have to like use insane technology or really weird means to try to save their souls from feeding Slaanesh.
Yeah.
Oh, the Dark Eldar. I was like, what's next on my notes? Yeah, the Dark Eldar. Remember that city within the Webway, Kamara, where everyone went to do stuff that was like depraved beyond even the pleasure cults and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So those guys were pretty damn safe when it came to the whole Slaanesh thing. But there's still the whole thing where Slaanesh wants all Eldar dead and wants to eat all of their souls. So if they die,
he can't get them.
Yes, but if they die, their soul still goes back to the warp normally. The soul doesn't stay within the webway. Just they are currently within the webway.
Yeah.
So if they die, he still can eat their soul, and they obviously want to avoid that because that's a bad thing. No one really wants to feed the gods of chaos unless you're kind of already on their side, and then they've already got your soul, so it doesn't really matter. So these guys figured out that a good way to stop Slaanesh from actively pursuing them was to do things that like fed into him anyway. So rather than Slaanesh getting their souls, he was just feeding off of the deeds that they committed. So they just kept doing all the crazy depraved stuff. But there's only so much you can do within Kamara. So they started going out into the galaxy, like out of the webways and everything, into the actual galaxy and doing it. So they would just raid planets and stuff. And they are about as horrible can be. As an example, because I'm liking, rather than going too deep into these things, giving you like a special feature of them, so that we can look into that particular group better later in their own light. Their one is that once in a while they will just take people as they steal slaves a lot, by the way. That's one of the reasons they go out raiding, is to steal massive amounts of slaves, and then take them back to Kamara and just do stuff to them, I guess. Make them do stuff, I guess. Whatever. I don't really want to think too much about what they do to them. But I would say the worst thing they do is after they've like broken your spirit, they will just turn you into furniture.
What?
Yeah, they will turn you into furniture. And by the way, I don't mean that they skin you and use you upholster a couch. I mean they will like form you together with like 3 other living guys in a couch.
And they're living.
Yeah.
Still.
Well, vaguely speaking.
I know. I think I know how they got the adjective dark.
Yeah. Well, like they're the Eldar that are currently kind of, in a vague sense, working for chaos. They're the evil Eldar, for lack of a better term. Because they're just the worst guys.
Yeah, it sounds horrendous, you know.
It is. They are just the worst people. They're like space pirates now, basically. But yeah, they will turn some people into furniture down the line. So they are the worst. But doing that kind of stuff, obviously, because it still is depraved and excessive as it was before when Slaanesh was born, or even worse now, that all is a form of worship for Slaanesh. So it makes him stronger. So Slaanesh is like, you know what? You keep doing that, your soul isn't worth as much as the millennia of worship I can get from you. So Slaanesh focuses efforts on all the other Eldar that aren't doing that stuff anymore, so that, or because their soul is much more valuable than letting them live. So let the Dark Eldar keep worshipping in a vague sense, and Slaanesh will focus on other things. So it keeps them safe in a way. The Craftworld Eldar and the Exodate Eldar have a thing called a Soul Stone that they carry around, that if they die, their soul goes into this little gem, and then it can be put into the big Infinity Circuit thing. There's actually, I'm not going to get too far into this because it's a whole contrived thing, but there is an ideology going on within the Eldar at the moment that if they get enough souls within the Infinity Circuit, it will become a powerful enough like coalescence of warp energy between all the souls that are within it that it could be used to defeat Slaanesh one day.
Okay.
But a majority of like the Exodite and Craftworld Eldar carry these little soul stones just so that if they die, Slaanesh isn't fed off of it. Because feeding Slaanesh is like, rule 1, don't do that.
Yeah, and rule number 2, don't let a lot of people do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So every race has found their own, or every group of Eldar, every faction of them has found their own way to deal with the Slaanesh thing. So the Kamaral ones are the Dark Eldar, they just basically worship him instead of dying for him. The Craft World and stuff like that on their big nomadic ships, they have the Soul Stones in the Infinity Circuit, and the Harlequins have their god looking after them. So that is the gist of everything that happened, but that takes place between like millennia 24, 25, and 30. So that's like 5,000 years this all took place over. It's a whole thing. But it's year like 30,000 is when Slaanesh was born finally, or around early 30th millennia is when Slaanesh actually came forward. So they spent like 5,000 years getting more and more deprived. So you can see how it got as far as it did with that length of time and no one dying. You just get better at being weird, I guess, if you do it long enough.
Moral of the story.
That's it, aye. So that 5,000 year span is a pretty big chunk of lore for Warhammer. It's a really important bit, but like it doesn't take a long time to run over because there is like no documentation of that period. Which is kind of handy, actually, for the sake of this. But also, you now know a lot more about the Eldar as where they stand now, because they're nomadic. There's barely any of them left. They used to run the joint, and now they're struggling to survive. And some of them are evil, some of them are clowns, some of them are on magical fortresses, and some of them are just living in the middle of nowhere planets.
Yeah.
So the fallout of this situation is a few different things. So the Eldar, as I just went over, are nomadic, fractured, and pretty effed up. Because all of the kind of chaos and the warp and the coalescence of these souls and everything all formed together, it actually cleared up the ridiculous warp storms that were going on. So after the Birth of Slaanesh, traveling in the warp was actually pretty safe again.
Okay.
So that was a big help for humanity.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. But possibly, or that is like equally as important as the next part, which is probably a bit more notable though. When Slaanesh was born properly, all of the souls being torn into the warp all at once from like the Eldar homeworlds and everything kind of tore a hole in reality between the physical world and the warp. Just that sheer influx of like souls and energy and everything like that just created like a warp hole or a wormhole kind of thing into the warp. So there's just this massive tear in the center, or hole, I guess, in the center of the galaxy of like crazy green energy that is literally a gateway directly between the physical world and the warp now.
And the warp, yeah.
So there are demons in the warp that are now sitting there like, oh cool, a way out. All the gods of chaos are like, cool, this is gonna be much easier now. Like, there's a lot of people that are like, this is a great opportunity for me to mess up everything out there. It's like a maximum security prison in a world with like superheroes and supervillains. It's like blowing a hole in the wall of the prison. Now all the bad stuff can get out.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, like you referenced Marvel earlier, and I think we could reference Marvel again because it kind of have the same, with the alien vibes and stuff like that. I don't know if it was Endgame or which movie it was, but where there's like a warp hole, whatever, going out to space, like appearing above New York, I believe.
Oh, that's the first Avengers film.
It was?
Yeah, because they throw the nuke through it.
Oh yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah, you get the gist of it, right?
Yeah, that's exactly
just
it.
Like a portal or some, with just from sheer energy that opens up to like a whole new dimension, but just with the warp. So,
big portal opens above where you live, and suddenly there is so much evil stuff coming out. So that's a pretty major issue that they had to deal with, that everyone has to deal with now, I guess.
You don't say.
Yeah, weird that. It's called the Eye of Terror, because it's just this big green maw of energy in the center of in the middle of space. Which also obviously like ate all the planets and stuff in that area. Actually, as an added bit about this, there is a cool thing. So you know how in the first episode I told you that there was like special kinds of like human normal soldiers, like the Kriegsmen that are like they fight like they're in World War II because they nuked their planet to pieces.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at a picture at them right now. The one with the
gas masks.
Yeah. And like the soldier World War II outfits.
Yes, alright. So there's a few types of like normal human guardsmen that have no business fighting the things they fight. So there is the Kriegsmen, which are the ones you're looking at. There's Katachan ones that all dress like Rambo. Every Katachan is just an absolute unit of a human. And they are, like, their planet, everything wants to eat them, everything wants to poison them. It's like Australia. It's just a bad place to be. But if you grow up there and life is nothing but fighting for survival, you grow up to basically be Rambo 2.0. It's like Rambo on steroids. So they are monstrous fighters, even though they're just normal humans.
Yeah.
And there is a group that are like the classic guardsmen, right? These are like, you say guardsmen, this is what a lot of Warhammer fans bring to mind just naturally. But they're titled, so that's why I'm bringing them up. The Cadian Guardsmen, right? The Cadian Guard are a particular type of guard, right? There is nothing particularly special about them physically or anything like that. It is just the way they do what they do, right? So there is a thing that is set up once in a while by humanity, where we are now in everything's going on, called Guardian Worlds. So whenever there's some really bad stuff going on in a particular section of space, we will set up like perimeter planets around it to stop stuff getting out, right? To stop the spread of whatever it is. And what we do is we take a planet take these planets that like ring the area or whatever, and we basically do like an industrial revolution of the planet, make it an absolute factory forge world, so it can pump out like equipment for war and ammunition on an unprecedented scale. And then it is outfitted and set up to outfit the most guardsmen physically possible, just so that if anything tries to get past it, it has as many guys and as many guns as possible ready to shoot at whatever goes. And it's just it's a guardian world. The whole point is it's guarding something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's in the name.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Cadia is like the most well-known planet, I believe, that is a guardian world of the Eye of Terror. So
Okay.
Cadia is like right on the edge of the Eye of Terror. Like the sky in Cadia is green because of all they can see is the Eye of Terror's glow.
Yeah.
And the guardsmen there spend their entire lives and all their ancestors and all their descendants' lives fighting the things that come out of the warp and try to get into the actual galaxy.
Oh, that sounds horrendous.
Yeah, it's an absolute living nightmare. So there is a quote at a pretty heavy point within the storyline of Cadia by one of their generals, and he's addressing the guardsmen because they're in a battle and everything's just getting worse and worse and worse, and the spirit of the guardsmen starts to break. Like they're starting to basically give up, and this general takes the field in front of them and addresses all the guardsmen and essentially says, "Today you have to do your duty because no one else will. You have to stand up to chaos and fight because no one else will." And then
That's a lot of pressure.
it is, and there's a section at the end of the quote which I will find for when we get to it in the actual episode list. There's a section at the end of the quote where he says, "Any man who cannot do his duty identify himself now to the commissar so that he can be relieved of duty and stop wasting my time."
Oh, ooh.
Yeah, like
Ooh.
they take their stuff seriously.
I mean, yeah. Who else would?
Well, they have to. That's the thing. No one else is going to do it. So, all in all, this gives you a good idea of one, the Eldar race as they stand currently in the scope of this. Also, it explains where Slaanesh came from, and as an added thing, I'm going to give you a little thing about humanity. So, I'd say that humanity was suffering because of all the warp storms that were going on. The warp storms that had became so bad that you couldn't travel through the warp normally anymore, the way humanity did, or communicate through the warp anymore because of the storms. Slaanesh's birth cleared all that up, and suddenly humanity that had became splintered and isolated was suddenly, one, able to travel the galaxy again in mass distances, and were now in contact with lost colonies again. So it allowed humanity to actually start doing stuff again. Rather than declining, we were suddenly able to actually get back on with what was going on. So this time period, Eldar and humanity basically have nothing to do with each other, but if it weren't for the Eldar, humanity would have probably crumbled.
Ooh.
Yeah. So that is about all I have to say on this particular topic. What do you think? What are your thoughts on this matter? Let's hear it.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff, if I'm being quite honest. I mean, it's nice to get, like, the background story to how the god of greed and lust and all that stuff came to be. Like to get like a deeper dive into that background story, especially with this race. So yeah, a lot of it going in depth, where I just have to put two and two together sometimes. But it sounds interesting. It sounds interesting, especially with, like, when they take stuff from, like, real life, especially with, like, northern mythology and stuff like that, and chuck that into the stories. I do like that a lot.
I'm a big fan of those kind of things too. There is a lot more of that, especially when we get to, like, humanity and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, I think my favorite part about this was, like, with the soul. What was it called? Like the soul statues.
The Avatar of Cain.
Yes.
I believe so. There is, like real-time strategy games like Command and Conquer and stuff.
Yeah.
There was one of those games that was set in 40k called Dawn of War, and I believe if you played as the Eldar, you could actually have the Avatar of Cain as a unit.
Bruh.
It was like your top tier god unit that was meant to take out everything else.
Yeah.
He was a cool guy.
It's cool.
So
But yeah, in terms of like the story with like the city, or in the tunnel, the city. What was it called again? The
Kamara.
naming is the cover. Yeah, it's funny when you listen to stories like this because like obviously right now you are in the role with the host, like as a storyteller, like the primary storyteller who tells me the story, and me as someone who's new coming into with like I have no perspective about this. I have no idea what anything is.
Yeah.
But it's funny when you as the storyteller can kind of like visualize the story for me, and I immediately start to imagine how it would look. I just find that funny. Like I imagine how it would look inside my head. How that would actually be. So that's kind of
That's the idea
cool,
what
I
we're
think.
going for here. We're trying to make this accessible for people that don't know anything about it. And I feel like one of the best ways to do that is to actually teach someone that knows nothing about it. Because any questions that you will have is probably the same question that a listener that doesn't know anything about this would have.
Yeah, exactly.
So it seems like it's a good formula for actually teaching people that are brand new to this. Just so anyone listening knows, in future we will get into more detail and more precision about a lot of matters, especially when it comes to humanity, because there's a huge amount of detail about humanity. It's the most detail about humanity, I believe.
I'm looking forward to it, by the way.
I'm
looking
glad.
forward to that.
I'm very
Yeah.
excited for getting to the humanity stuff as well, because it's possibly the most laid out storyline.
Mhm.
So there is a lot more you can get into, and also there are a lot more fleshed out characters because it follows for such a long time in such depth. You can actually like bond to the characters and get like a sense of what they're going through and stuff with the storyline when you get to them. So I'm very excited for that. But we do have a few other framing things we need to do first. But there's also a lot of other races to learn about and a lot of other random nonsense to learn about first. So we got some time. We got some stuff we can go through.
Mhm.
I think my way going through this episode guide wise is going to be trying to feed off whatever piques your interest if possible, to try and keep it going in like a natural progression, or going as like storyline points and then going from there kind of thing. So if
Oh,
after this episode, because there are more storyline things like this that are isolated storylines that frame a lot of stuff that we can go into. But if we finish this one, you go, you know what? I really want to learn about the Harlequins. Like, I can make a Harlequin episode. You know what I mean? We can do that. So we're figuring the direction of each new episode, or each next episode as we go.
And when the series gets further developed, and if you guys have the interest in it, we are going to be making some social medias as to where we can take requests, for example, from the audio listeners.
Yeah, one thing we had already discussed that we were going to do is we will be doing answering listener questions in a separate episode that will be like an additional thing among the typical podcast episodes as well. So we're really hoping you guys can get involved a bit. Also, I want to throw this out there. I'm not perfect at this, and I want to keep this as accurate as possible. So if I say something that is blatantly wrong or blatantly misunderstood, feel free to contact us and correct me, and I will issue a correction.
Feel free to harass Ryan as much as possible.
Yes,
No,
I like how Mez didn't put himself in for that one as well.
Nah, I'm just a moderator in the Q&As and stuff. I don't know anything. So I'm not comfortable answering stuff.
Oh god! But I think that's all we need to say about the fall of the Eldar at the moment. So
Yeah.
we will catch you guys next time for the next episode of Iterators of the Imperium.
See you then.